Hello and welcome back to the RevOps Show. If you're watching the recording, you'll recognize we've been bouncing back and forth from the new studio to the old one. Soon, we'll be fully in our new studio thanks to our good friends at OYE, but for now, we're in a bit of a back and forth movement as they're putting some finishing touches on the set. Getting into the actual focus of today's episode, Doug and Jess are discussing the do's and don'ts of data migration. Buckle up for this one because there's a lot to discuss and a lot of opinions. So with that, let's start the show.
Jess,
Doug,
we're back in our old studio.
we are.
Renovations. I'm sad.
Me too.
But we'll be
I'm
back.
sad, but excited.
We'll be back. What is it? You'll be back. Oh, that's.
Oh,
King George.
no.
Hey, you're wearing. You're in a Hamilton mood today.
Because I'm just like my country.
You
Young,
are.
scrappy, and hungry.
Well, you're scrappy and hungry at least.
Oh, wow.
Aren't you a geriatric millennial? Isn't that your official?
I am a geriatric millennial.
Geriatric millennial.
Barely squeaked in there.
And then is Gen X before? Is it Gen X then millennial? Is that what it is? Or no? There's something between Gen X.
Is it Gen Z? Gen Z.
So
Gen
then
Z.
what's today?
I have no idea what today is. Those crazy kids.
You know, I
don't
would
know
have
what they
gotten
call
away
it.
with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids. You know what's sad?
What?
Fewer and fewer people every day will understand that reference.
Does that'll make you feel old?
It just makes me feel sad. Not old so much as sad. It was back in the day of when cartoons were good. Now it's all like, hey, let's make the cartoon look as realistic as possible.
Where cartoons were good and very inappropriate.
Yeah, that's what made cartoons good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, how much could you sneak by? How many references could you sneak by? I mean, you know, it was a. What was I was reading the other day? Like this is the first generation that doesn't understand. Like these kids today, that don't understand. Oh no, it was about how kids today will never understand how Gen X kids would watch shows on television simply because that's what was on.
Yeah.
Right. And how many shows we watched that our parents watched. And if you think like what, the genius of Scooby-Doo, the genius of cartoons back in that day, and they still do it with movies, obviously, is how do you create the cartoon so the kids will like it, but the parents will enjoy it as well because they had to watch it too, because
that was the only thing you could watch.
I mean, I remember our house, we were like we were living in luxury because we had a second TV that sometimes we could go to and I'm gonna watch in the other room.
Wow, fancy.
We were fancy.
You guys were
very, very fancy. All right, so what are we talking about, Jess?
This is
topic today.
This is why I was excited.
Oh, I thought you were excited because we were going to be back in our back in our new studio. I thought you were excited about the studio that's getting some final touches.
Well, I'm excited about that too, but yeah.
I could show you a really complex mind map. I hear that gets you really excited.
That does too. It does too. I'm weird.
If you want to take Jess out on a great date and you just show her a complicated mind map and
There we go.
She'll be putty in your hands.
Didn't know where you were going to go with that. Glad you went that way.
I try to steer to the.
I want to talk about data migration today.
Oh, my favorite.
I knew it would be.
Not really.
It would be. I want to talk about the do's and don'ts. What are some of the mistakes people make? What are the conceptions of data migration? I know you could talk all day about mistakes.
Meta, I would say don't.
You would say don't?
Don't.
Just don't migrate.
Just don't migrate.
Just status quo?
No, just don't migrate.
All right, that's helpful. Great. Good podcast. We solved it.
You know what I call it Schrodinger's migration. Schrodinger's data migration.
I might steal that. I like that.
You can migrate, just don't check on it because it's the checking on it that causes the migration to fail. If you don't check on it, the migration is both successful and a failure.
As the person who leads a lot of our data migrations, that is a fact. I'm just going to start telling people don't check the data migration anymore. Just migrate the data and be done. All right. So where I want to start is a question that we've talked about frequently, and it's an interesting topic when it gets brought up with clients in particular, which is how clean should your data be before you migrate it?
So I want to make sure, I want to take a step back just for a second, because I
Okay.
think that two things get conflated here often.
Okay.
So if we're talking about a migration, we're talking about migrating data from one system to another system, from an old system to a new system, for purposes of retiring the old system and utilizing the new system,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Data cleanup is often a piece of that, but data cleanup, data management, data protocols, that could apply whether you're changing systems or you're not changing systems. So this is as it relates to going from old sys to new sys.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, how clean does your data need to be?
Yeah. How clean should your data be before you migrate?
What is clean data?
That's a topic in and of itself. The up-to-date data, so clean data would be data that's up to date in the system. So for instance, my email addresses are up to date. Data is filled in fully. So the key data that I need is filled into the fields, and the format of the data is right. So when we talk about formatting, for instance, all caps, names, so names are formatted properly, for an example. When we talk about clean data, those are kind of the big three.
I wouldn't call data formatting. I wouldn't call data protocols a part of clean data.
No?
I think that's a step. I mean, it is. I think people talk about clean data, and we need to clean up our data all the time. But I don't think anyone's ever, or I don't want to say anyone, but I think the conversation happens without what is a clear definition of what is clean data. So,
well, and I think clean data means, to your point, I think this is where you're getting, it could mean different things to different people, and what's clean to company A is not going to be what's clean to company B. So it really depends on what your requirements are.
Yeah. And, I'm going to go back to the prime directive. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, the prime directive is the business process needs to drive the technology. The business process needs to drive the data. The business process needs to drive the protocols, not the other way around. And so, my question is, A, what system are you changing from? What system are you going to? B, what's the business reason for the change? And so, if you're going from proverbial old CRM to proverbial new CRM, I think, and you have not had strong data protocols to begin with, which you probably don't, or this conversation wouldn't be particularly relevant, then, clean data in a lot of ways, I mean, clean data is a myth.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, you as an example, clean data, my email addresses are up to date. Well, and I'm going to sound like a complete, I don't know what, but something that's like extremely OCD, because I'm going to say, well, what's your definition of up to date? Is up to date that it's the latest information that you have? Is up to date that it's completely accurate? Shit, what was it? Probably 5-6 years ago, the data was that, an email list, a corporate email list atrophies at about 20% per year. My gut is, but based on the Great Resignation that we're involved in, my gut is that it's probably higher than that. So,
yeah.
I mean, if I went through this whole process of cleaning, like let's just say there was a process that I could clean all my data and I move it. Well, guess what? That day, at least 1% of your data is no longer accurate. So again, this pursuit of all my data is accurate, all my data is on point, everything is, it sounds really good. It works really, really well in theory. It just doesn't stand up to real world mid-market. I would challenge anybody to say, I think if you look at the largest, I mean, take Amazon, they're probably as good with data as anybody that's out there.
Yeah.
I am certain that their definition of clean data is not 100%.
Yeah.
Right. As a matter of fact, I know it's not 100% because I still get stuff to an old email address that I don't even know how Amazon got that.
Right.
Okay. But it's, and so, it's really about establishing a threshold. And I think you've got a couple of things that play in here. If we're talking about migration,
Mhm.
if, so give a reason. Why are you moving systems? So why are you changing your CRM?
The current CRM we have doesn't have adoption with the sales team. It's too clunky, too hard for the sales
Difficult to
team
work
to
with. There you go.
use.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to get adoption of the CRM. Oh, and by the way, if you want to keep data up to date, adoption's kind of a necessary requirement.
Yep.
So you're looking to increase adoption, so your system's not being used effectively, et cetera. The question that you're really asking is, you're asking me how clean does your data need to be before you migrate?
Yeah.
I would say the moment cleaning your data is holding up the migration, that's how clean your data needs to be.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, why not move the data, right? Well, because the data is bad. Okay, great. Well, right now your data is bad, and your CRM is badly designed and implemented. And no one's using it. So if we move it to a system that people start using, then we've got bad data. And again, I mean, there's a difference between bad data and data that's not clean, if you will. And we should probably make sure that I explain what that is. But why stay in a bad system with data that's not at the hygiene you want it to be, when you'd be in a better state of being in good system, data not where you want it to be? Because one of the best ways to actually clean data in the real world without expending lots and lots of resources is clean it while it's being used.
Yeah.
Most databases that I see, they're working 20 to maybe 60% of their database. On one hand, who cares about 40% of your database? And again, I'm not saying don't clean it. I'm saying cleaning it is a separate issue from migrating it.
And don't let that hold you
don't
up.
hold that up. And by the way, you're going to clean your data to some degree just going through the protocols of property mapping or field mapping, right? If you do a field mapping exercise correctly, that's going to clean your data. That's going to make your data operational. And you've heard me say this many times. I do not measure a database by the amount of I'm going to call it wrong data. I don't want to say wrong because that don't measure it by its lack of hygiene. Measure it by its hygiene, right? So I mean, we had a client. They had a probably 150,000 name database. They really knew about 1,000. That's all they were working. And I was like, okay, great. Well, we're going to start off with 1,000. And I now know that, and you know what my goal is, a month from now, I want to have 5,000 that are accurate or right. And that's kind of, how you go about doing it. So I think the whole, I think the obsession about cleaning the data before you migrate it is equivalent to putting a blog post through 17 rounds of edits before you post it.
Yep. I agree. You want to talk about bad data versus clean data so we can clarify what those two things are?
So bad data is wrong data. If I were bringing over a big database that I didn't have a lot of confidence in, I would bring the data over and then I would put it through like an email verification system, which email verification systems they're not 100% accurate, but they're more accurate than zero.
Right.
And so that's going to help you identify bad emails. And, you want to avoid bad emails for a lot of different reasons. They can cause problems in any number of processes. They can also waste a lot of time. So being able to identify that. And then what I'll do is I'll kind of quarantine that. And if you think about it, there's, if we talk about clean data, we also have to prioritize what cleanliness is. There's the record,
right?
And then there's the field's properties within the record, right? So Jim Smith is at ABC Co. Is Jim Smith at ABC Co? Yes, Jim Smith is at ABC Co. So the record is accurate. Jim Smith's email address is wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So the email is bad, or critical issue. that's old or not filled in, right? Or his last name in the system is small s, capital M, ITH, right? Again, record good, data in record bad. So if I'm, if I'm bringing over a big database and I go through an email verification, and let's say, 15% of the database emails come across as not good email addresses. I'm going to quarantine those records.
Right.
Now, depending upon what's going on, I'll decide how much energy I put towards reviewing those records. But I'm going to quarantine those records so that, in essence, any of that data is dormant data. It's going to become latent data. So I'm going to build in the protocols within the system so that it's in the database, but any of the stuff that we're doing, it's like it's not in the database, right? And I can do that a lot faster than I can clean it, so that I've got an operational system. Because again, there are some companies that have data cleaning teams, right? Data management, data maintenance teams that are always working on this. And I would say to you, think about that. There are companies out there that have people where managing and cleaning, maintaining that data is their full-time job. And they're not at 100%. They're probably not at 80%, right?
Right.
So that's how big the task is. Businesses don't win business. Businesses don't scale because their databases are clean.
Yeah.
Right. Businesses scale because they're consistently improving their processes. They're consistently improving their structures. So if your data is shit right now, what I say is congratulations. You are where you are.
Yeah.
And you've got shit data. Like, in some ways I look at it and I say, that's better than being where you are and having really clean, great data. Because if I've got really clean, great data, well, I can't get any better at that. So I got to get better at other things to continue to grow. And those things are probably harder. If my database is shit, making my database suck a little bit less is a lot easier than, right?
Yeah.
And so as your database gets better, there's process performance. So what I would say is, again, don't let the data migration, don't let the hygiene of your data prevent you from beginning to embark on other process improvements. And, one of the reasons, I'm sorry, I'm kind of stream of thought here. All of our databases are great until we put salespeople on it. Come on, salespeople. I'm a salesperson. I include myself in there. We can't lose our sense of humor, right? Look, I mean, so first off, unless your systems clearly communicate, it goes back to business process, drives things. Everybody interprets what every property means through their own lens. And they use what they use based upon whatever convoluted approach that they have to do what they do. Right. And look, you've heard me say this before. I think the act of selling is very similar to the act of hitting a baseball. Everybody's batting stance, everybody's hitting style, or at least everybody that's really good, it's unique to that individual. So every seller has their unique style.
Sure.
And so until you start demonstrating in actions the power and meaning of data, then sales reps aren't going to acknowledge, realize, understand, work to keeping that data clean. So if you're going through this whole big exercise of data cleaning, but it's kind of like, this is probably a bad analogy, but if you're overweight, I can say this as being someone that's overweight. Like, if I just went out and somebody said, okay, here's a procedure to make my stomach the size, to look thinner, et cetera, but I haven't changed my underlying behaviors and the structure of what I'm doing, so I just go right back to doing the things that caused me to be overweight, then, I haven't fixed anything.
Sure.
Right. And so really what you want to look at, we talked about this in the last episode, the adoption flywheel, is you really want to look at it as an adoption flywheel, and data integrity is a piece of that. Right. But this whole effort that people go through to clean data, in the sense of we're getting rid of data that's in there. I'm not against doing that if it's done as part of something, like if there's no additional effort to it. but any iota of effort to eliminate data that's not being used, like, so what?
So you're talking, when you say eliminate data that's being used, because I just want to make sure that
That's
it's
not being
clear
used.
that's not being used. Sorry. I just want to make sure it's clear to people listening, because I know what you mean, because we've gone through this exercise multiple times. You're talking about when I say, okay, I want to remove all the records from the database. So it's not even a segmentation piece we're talking about. We're talking about actually deleting records out of the database, or not bringing those records over in the migration.
It could be it could be about records. It could also be about, well, we need to figure out what properties we're using and what properties we're not using, and I don't want to, you know, or which of these records, like, we need to figure out what data in this property is accurate and what data isn't.
Yeah.
And you ask the question, okay, well, what do you use this property for? And the answer is, well, you know, it varies. Which is really, I don't know.
My favorite answer to that question.
Right. I don't know how I use it. Well, okay,
Yeah.
great. When you know how you use it, then we'll figure it right. But to spend a whole lot of time to clean up this, you know, I mean, like, what was the last action? Who cares if it's accurate or not, unless they're active in a cycle. And if they're active in a cycle, then that's going to be monitored through a management process, through an account review process.
Sure.
Right. But the fact that, like, I close somebody and they've been a customer for 6 years and there's still a last action in there that's not relevant. Like, I mean, if somebody has a different take, I'm open to it, but who cares?
Yep. Alrighty. So this kind of connects to a little bit of what you're talking about. Is it better to migrate all of the data, so we're moving from old system to new, or is it better to migrate a subset of the data?
If there's a really clear line of data that fits this criteria, that's
So
really
active in a cycle. Like, let's.
Well, actually, it's the opposite.
Okay.
If there's clear criteria of what I'll call dead data,
okay,
then not migrating that, I would say don't migrate that. If you have to do a lot of work to figure that out, then migrate it. Now, someone says,
let's bring everything over.
But the contact tier, I'm gonna have to pay more. I mean, I don't know every system that's out there, and Lord knows I don't like paying $10 more to an app than I have to. But the amount of time that I see people spend to manage staying under that tier, if you were to take a look at the cost of time, and again, especially if we're talking about, you know, a migration of a delay, I would say that, you know, a lot, you know, if you're spending a lot of time on that, it's probably not time well spent. And this gets outside of data migration a little bit. You know, in sales, there's a phrase, time kills all deals. Time kills all implementations.
It does. Yeah.
Right. And momentum is crucial to a successful implementation. And the number of times that you know, in the pursuit of perfect, in the pursuit of ideal, in the pursuit of quote unquote right. Like, someone says to me, but Doug, moving bad data over isn't right. I can't argue with that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, you know, it is definitely not right to move bad data over. It is not right to have bad data in your system. It's definitely not right. The problem is, well, if that's the biggest not right that you're dealing with, then you are in very, very good shape. Now again, am I talking about, you know, the Amazons of the world? Am I talking about the Honeywells of the world, or think? No, I'm not talking about those companies. I'm talking about that mid-market company, that small to mid-market company, where you don't have teams of managing this. We're in the real world, and what you need is motion. You need to get water flowing. You need to generate energy, and anything that gets in the way of better is something that you want to mitigate. Are there times where you have no choice? Yeah, there are times when you have no choice, but you want to be very, very careful and very, very selective in that. Or the implementation gets bogged down, and before you know it, everyone's exhausted. Salespeople have spent, who knows how much time. And by the way, you ask a salesperson to go through their stuff and clean up this, that, or the other thing, you might look at it and legitimately you say it's an hour, right? Well, I want you to know that an hour of that to a typical salesperson is 20 hours of pain at least, because it's not what they do. They don't do it well. You have to remind them to do it 17 times.
Yep.
Right. And candidly, what I see is when you get it into, if you've got the right, if you've done the process design, like we talk about, you're going to get that cleaned up better, faster, stronger in utilization. And at the same time, you're going to pick up momentum. And so there's lots of ways to get to the point that you're going. And let's not forget that the objective, and again, this is why, the number one cause for implementation, like the first step towards failure is, and I see it happen all the time, is when you're changing systems without a clear business reason.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And by the way, the system is difficult isn't a good business reason.
Yeah.
Right? It's a good rationale for the change, but okay, it's difficult. So what is not happening? Right. When you start realizing, well, I need salespeople to do X, right, because we need better data for this, and we need then you begin to realize, okay, now we can prioritize all these different things. I don't know many people, certainly that we work with, that their objective is they want to win the CRM implementation award.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But so okay, if that's not why we're doing this, then let's not use the criteria for winning the CRM implementation award to be the blueprint.
Yeah, and it's funny that what you bring up about momentum, because it's so true. And the other thing that I find that I see when we get bogged down with, okay, we're going to go through this huge exercise of trying to get everything right and perfect. You get halfway through, everybody's completely burnt out. And so they get to a point where they're like, okay, we're just going to put it in. And the outcome is the same had you not gone through that. We're delayed and everybody's frustrated. Yeah. So I see that happen frequently. Like you think, oh, okay, this isn't going to be that hard to get through. You get halfway in it and you realize, okay, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. And let's just put it in now.
Yeah. When you talk about there is no better metaphor than when you're talking about cleaning data, of the idea of pulling on a thread. Right. There's not one thread. It doesn't, and then you're in the middle of it and you don't even know what you need to know to be able to do it. And now you've got, and then to be able to address the types of things that you want to address, there's going to be a direct cost associated to it because it's not something that you can do just manually. Yeah. And you're exactly right. You end up going through all the pain and then you end up putting bad data in anyways. And it's got, and then the implementation comes with finally, and by the way, the underlying cause of all that, bad process design.
Yep. Absolutely.
And by the way, part of bad process design, just realize that because I'm thinking of somebody, they shall remain nameless, is when like process design isn't for one group to determine. It's the company. It's got to become the company's MO.
Yeah.
Right. So, that's why that change is strategic. That's why RevOps is strategic. And, far too often data is looked through the lens of the tactical side of it. And once you start pulling on the thread and you start realizing what it means to, the structure, the process, the systems, et cetera, you really need to do it as part of an ongoing iterative improvement.
Yep. Agreed. All right. What's the best way to migrate? So talking about going from old system to new. You just don't. Well, if that's off the table.
Okay.
Because that's going to be off the table. Is it better to go through a spreadsheet like a CSV? Is it better to use a third-party migration tool, or is it better to use a native integration? And to give a specific example, let's just say the Salesforce HubSpot integration. So like a native to the system. What's the best way?
So in my opinion, the best way is an automated integration.
What does that mean?
the two systems are connected, they're mapped, and you get a full pull of data.
Okay.
That doesn't always mean it's actually the best in the situation, because if the data is not, I mean, if you've been using your CRM as primarily a Rolodex with random acts of activity being tracked, then, you know, the time and energy that it takes to have it move fully, you know, sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes, and I know, I mean, I learned this from you, sometimes by doing it as a CSV, we can actually identify and see you know, where connections are. So for example, I know, you know, like a very common issue we see with Salesforce is that oftentimes records in one object aren't properly associated with records in other objects.
Correct.
So,
yeah.
so when you move to, you know, if you move to a system like HubSpot, that can wreak a whole lot of havoc. And that aspect can actually be fixed more easily in a, you know, in an export import, because you can do some of that work manually to get it done, you know, better and faster. But, you know, the best way is the way that gets the critical data in the fastest.
So it's really about identifying what the critical data is first, and then you kind of know your path, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And realizing that, you know, you don't fix data in migration. Migration doesn't fix anything. Right. So,
Yeah.
so if you don't have the right adoption in the past, then a lot of times we get worried about things moving that are, you know, are highly variant anyways. You know, the worst thing is, look, I get it as a salesperson. Hey, I called somebody 7 years ago and I want to be able to see that.
Yeah.
I think that's something that salespeople tend to over focus on in a migration, but I get it. Like I would, you know,
Right.
you got to make the determination. Are you going to do the things to make that possible? And if you do, go in and do it. Or make the decision that you're not. I think what happens is there's a tendency where the way the implementation is announced is kind of half in, because we're trying not to. It's like, look, we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it. And if we're going to do it, then we're going to go all in and we're going to do the things that we need to do to make it happen.
Sure.
Or we're going to make the decision that for whatever reason, this is the data that's coming. This is the data that's not coming. This is the rationale, you know, and just be clear on what you're doing and why. And, you know, then there's going to, no matter what you do, there's going to be some moaning, because no one likes to change that. Nobody enjoys. There's no such thing as a system migration, a system change that people, you know, hey, let's do that again.
Yeah, and I think the point on clarity and making sure that you're communicating what you're bringing over, what you're not bringing over, that's a piece that gets missed, because all you say, okay, we're migrating data, and the expectation is, and this would never happen because the two systems are always going to be different, is that it's going to be a one-to-one match. That's what people think when they hear, okay, all the data is migrating over. I'm going to see exactly what I was seeing in the previous system. That's never going to happen.
Well, the funny thing is sometimes you can see everything that's in the other system. It's just shown differently, and
correct.
And you get, hey, you know, here's the other thing. I don't want to say don't defend the decision. That's the wrong term. Don't rationalize the decision. So in other words, if I make the decision that, look, we're, for whatever reason, moving all the activity history, et cetera, is just going to be too complicated, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then I'm going to communicate that. And when someone, you know, when the sales rep complains about it, acknowledge that, yeah, no, we understand that you're going to lose that data. Here's what we're doing to mitigate that in some way, if you can.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get that. Again, here's why we're doing it, right? The reason is,
yep.
You know, you know, a lot of these things are that the old system wasn't used properly. Because, by the way, it is much easier to migrate data from an old system that was being used properly to a new system that's going to be used properly, right? Now,
yeah,
more often than not, if the old system's being used properly,
you're
lo and
not leaving the
behold,
old system.
they don't go to a new system, right? So a lot of times, what's happening is, guess what? You know what? We're now paying the tech debt because we weren't using it properly.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That move of moving that in, and like some people, well, some of the activities right and some of the activities not right. Guess what? Working through that, juice ain't worth the squeeze.
Right. So now I want to talk about, what are some of the things that you notice are obvious after the fact that you don't think people realize or account for when doing a data migration? Like, what are the things that in hindsight that should have made total sense to me going into this?
Well, I should probably ask you that question because you live it more closely than I do. I'll give you my answer first, but then I want you to answer it. Well, this is going to be so misunderstood.
You are misunderstood, Doug.
Much ado about nothing.
Oh, yeah.
I think that there's an obsession about the old data. I want to get to day zero as fast as possible.
Yeah.
There's a new age, especially if we're talking about changing the, if we're changing the database. So we're changing the CRM. We are changing a core system. That is a new age. I want to get to new age as soon as possible, because until we get there, we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, right? We're putting up statues in Rome 3 days before it falls, right? I want to get to the new day as fast as possible, because once we're in the new, that's where progress comes. That's where momentum comes. That's where positivity comes. And the amount of time that we spend obsessing about these things, that's one obvious after the fact. So stop making it more complicated than it needs to be. Then the other thing that's obvious after the fact, having just said that, and some people might view this as, I think probably the single most important exercise, and it gets undervalued early, is mapping, is field mapping. I don't think people understand the strategic.
You took the words out of my mouth.
And by the way, I think that what happens is, it's like, oh yeah, here, then of course at the end it pops up, but it's also done disconnected from the strategic business process design conversation.
Yes.
And so, like we've got an issue right now, and it's probably not even the client that you're thinking of, because I'm the one dealing with them primarily, where, the problem is they've got a data hierarchy issue that goes beyond anything that relates to, and this is not a migration. This is, we're building out some reporting for them, and they're talking about how the CRM isn't giving them the juice for the squeeze. And the problem is that, the implementation was horrible because there's no data hierarchy. And then, so someone goes, well, look, this isn't, we're making it more complicated than it needs to be. No, we're not. It's actually complicated, right? You've got multiple, et cetera, et cetera. So, really understanding that, what is the entity orientation? What is the, data is only useful if it influences behavior, if it influences what we do. Now it could be, what we do could be automated, right? So someone might not actually be doing something, but understanding, what is the job being done is really the key to effective data, to an effective data schema. And so that would be, a key part of what I would say is obvious after the fact. What about you? What do you see?
So one thing I want to bring up on the property map piece, and I don't want to take us too far off the rails, but I will say that a mistake that people make in property mapping is they're only looking at it through the lens of moving data from one system to the other. And the property map really influences far more than that. It's how are we going to use the system? What are the key things that people need to see? What are the key fields? Do we actually know what all these things are? So I do think looking at it just through the lens of data transfer is the wrong way to look at a property map. So I do think that's one piece that gets lost in translation frequently. I think that the want to bring all of the historical data over is far overplayed. Like people think they're going to need data from 7 years ago. You hit on this a little bit, and you realize once you get into the system that you may not actually need that data. You really don't use that. So the want for historical data I see is often, okay, yeah, we probably didn't need all of those records in the system.
Yeah, but on the caveat on that is, so what if you got it?
Well, I agree with that, but there's usually like a long drawn out discussion, an argument that I see that played out a lot, where yes, we need this, no, we don't need this, and there's a whole lot, and so kind of much ado about nothing, if you will.
Okay, so here, this circles back to something that I said earlier. Do we need it? Don't we need it? If it's clear, concise, and obvious, no, we don't need it, eliminate it.
Yeah.
If the moment there's an argument of do we need it, don't we need it, then
Take
it's
it.
coming over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll deal with it in phase 2, because I had another thought. When you're migrating data, the purpose of data migration is you're shooting for equivalent state.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're moving to a new system. Like, the reason that you're changing systems is not because you want to clean your database, right? You want to get to the new system. The system's going to change a whole lot of things, and there's some process orientation that's going to change, et cetera. If you're using that as the means to, okay, well, let's improve our data, that's a really, really hard thing to do. And far more often than not, it's going to drag down what you're doing and probably increase the disruption, not decrease it. If I can get my data from where it is to the new place and it's at an equivalent state, then that's great. And candidly, I'm probably going to lose a little bit of something, right? Because everyone's gotten used to the data that they have in there, and that's a little bit of the cost that you have of changing the system. But I'm going to tell you, every day that data migration is what's holding up whatever your implementation plan is, that's a bad thing.
You just took my next thought, which is that I think frequently after we've gone through this process, people realize, one, why we have such a sense of urgency on it, and two, why stalling it actually, you end up causing more hurt than help, because the faster you can get people in, the faster you can get people using it, the faster the data actually improves in the new system. And it's not as, it's perceived as this bad thing initially, and then people eventually get used to the system and used to the data that's in there and the way that it's structured. And it's kind of like how people talk about pregnancy. You forget the pain, although I debate that, but you forget the pain and it's worth it.
Think of it this way. Every day that you're not putting data into the new system, you're putting data into the old system that is already messed up.
Right.
And so all you're doing is continuing to build the mountain that you need to fix. Right.
Yep.
The moment I get them into the new system, like everything that you do to clean up your old system data is, there's no real juice there. When I get it in the new system, now as I change it, I'm also getting system adoption, use, et cetera. So yeah, I think that that's why I say, the fastest that gets what's required is the best.
Yep. I agree. All right. I thought this was good. My two favorite things that we brought up, and I see what you said about you don't fix data in a migration. Like, I think I'm going to put that on a slide somewhere. It's going to get talked about frequently, because there is this perception that, okay, we're going to migrate the data, and by some form of migration magic, everything's going to be beautiful and lovely and perfect and look the way that I want it to look. And the data that wasn't there in the other system is going to magically appear in the new system. I think that's a key piece that people lose. And then how crucial momentum is to an implementation. I don't think that can be overstated. Like, because you frequently get bogged down in migration. Like, that's the place a lot of times where we get stuck.
Yeah, I think kind of the way I would talk about it, you can only do, I'm going to call them chunk changes, big chunks of change. You have to limit how many of those things are going on. And what I would say is fixing, cleaning, whatever your data, that's a chunk.
Yeah.
Changing your systems, that's a chunk. You can do both, but you can only do them one at a time. So either, if you want to fix the data and then implement a system change, that's I'm not going to tell you that's wrong. But if you're on a system change, and I think in most places, if your system's not right and your data's not right, fix the system first, then fix the data. And so that data fixing should be a phase 2, right? So that would be my parting advice to people that are listening about this. By the way, if you're not changing your CRM, but you've got process issues, fix those first, right? Get the system of record before you get the system of record. Right. What is your system? How is that supposed to work? Get that moving in the right place. That will drive. And by the way, that'll help support the move to data. You go through this whole thing of cleaning up the data, but you don't get the adoption on the system. People keep putting in bad data and you got to go through the whole process again.
Yeah.
And that's all I got to say about that.
Well, thanks, Forrest.
That's what I'm here for. All right, I guess that wraps us up for this episode of the RevOps Show. Jess, hopefully the contractors are finished for our next episode. And we'll be back too. in our exciting new studio. Until next time, don't hesitate. Reach out to us on Twitter, LinkedIn. If you have any questions, any topics you're dealing with, we'd love to help you address them.
Thanks, guys.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. I don't know about you, but migrating data just seems like a tedious job to get done. And listening to the insights from Doug and Jess have made it seem way more manageable. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to go subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and share the episode. If you have any questions you would like to ask Doug or Jess about migrating data or anything RevOps related, email me at hannah@imaginellc.com or hit us up on Twitter @demandcreator. Until next time, remember, you can't solve your upstream problems downstream.